Okay, so there are lots of big pieces in this video. It's actually really dense. um, so I'm going to break it down as we talk a little bit more in depth about what executive functioning is. But big pieces I want us to be thinking about right away. I love identifying executive functioning as air traffic control because I do feel like most people have a foundation for what that is and looks like, and just how detrimental it can be if air traffic control isn't operating. So if executive functioning is our air traffic control, and stressors and triggers are storms, when we have people with extensive trauma, it's like trying to fly a plane over the Bermuda Triangle. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay. I do, if you're into like conspiracy theories and things, suggest you look that up after. But it's this portion of the map where planes just get lost. They crash and burn, and we can't find them. So people with extreme trauma histories, if they're trying to have their executive functioning, support them in getting their skills to operate, and lots of storms are happening, and then they're over the Bermuda Triangle, they're getting lost. And what's happening is they're getting lost at schools, in our classrooms. And they're getting lost because they're shut down and withdrawing, they're sleeping, they're ignoring, or they're getting pushed out because their behaviors are big. So think about that as we're going through. Okay, so as the video said, executive functioning is our command and control. It helps us manage all of life's tasks. We start learning it very early, hopefully, if you have a safe, supportive household. And when we think about scaffolding, these are not skills that always have to start in like a sequential order. So I don't have to learn A, B, and C in order to have my executive functioning work well. Different people learn different parts of executive functioning depending upon their culture, depending upon their gender, depending upon their cognitive ability at different times and places and spaces. So it's kind of cool in that way. So you can learn like D, C, F, Z. And as long as eventually you get the whole alphabet, you're set up for life. But the idea is we want to make sure that kids have the full alphabet or the full executive functioning skills so that they're set up, regardless of which ones they need to navigate or learn first. We've talked about how development is not always linear. It does control our developmental tasks, though. So if we start thinking about Erik Erikson, he is a developmental theorist who looks at each stage of a child's growth. What is their developmental milestone? What do they need to accomplish in order to continue to perpetuate forward in their development? This gets tricky when we're working with our students, given that a lot of our students and scholars do have cognitive impairments that delay these essential developmental tasks. For some of them, they might not grow past a certain point, and that's fine. Our job is about supporting kids getting to their highest level, meeting them where they're at, and having high expectations for them. For some of our students and scholars, this might mean that they're just a little bit slower to learn and accomplish those developmental milestones. And again, that's where those safe, supportive learning relationships really come into play because they're going to be practicing these skills with you, regardless if they're executive functioning or social emotional learning or math or science or reading. They practice them every day in the classroom. So just be thinking about that as we talk a little bit more about what these skills actually are. Okay. So as the video said, another way to think about executive functioning skills are self-regulation skills. So self-regulation is really simply just the ability to regulate your body so that your parts of the brain that are associated with higher level thinking can go online. So our brains are built from the time we're born, bottom up. Right? So that most bottom basic part of our brain is focused on survival, which makes a lot of sense. If you think about your job as a baby is to survive because you want to continue to develop. And then as you accomplish more things and learn new skills and get out in the world, you start developing bigger skills that support those stages of development. At some point, the idea is, though, if you can't keep your system calm enough to access that education of those skills, then you can't learn them. And the big ones that we really need in order for kids to do school, or another way to think about it is supporting their educability, we need them to have working memory, right? Working memory is an essential executive functioning tool, but it's also a self-regulation tool. We need persons to be able to recall on past memory in order to access it and how it applies to new learning concepts. Now, I am not a teacher. This might not be the first time in our online presentations that I've said this, but my understanding of educational pedagogy is very similar to skill attainment in that we have to have a starting point and then we scaffold. And when we grow up, things get harder and more challenging, but we're constantly referring back to our prior knowledge in order to inform our decision-making and development as we continue to grow. So that's where that working memory becomes really important. Our mental flexibility. Are we able to shift tasks? Oftentimes in a classroom, you are asking students to do multiple things at once, even if you're not overtly asking them, right? So there's those covert roles in a classroom that we're expecting kids just to know. They're supposed to be navigating conversations possibly with peers while working on an assignment, with dealing with all of the environmental factors in the classroom. And if they have sensory processing concerns or diagnoses like autism spectrum disorder, they might really struggle with that mental flexibility and they can only focus on one task at a time. And oftentimes when we think about self-regulation, we primarily think of the skill about self-control. And again, it's that ability to slow our body down and to focus on things that require that working memory, mental flexibility, and support our higher levels of learning. When we have learners that struggle with trauma, their self-control is highly impacted and impaired. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, as well as some skills that you can support. But just be aware of these things. And when you see a child struggling with these skills, one of the most basic things you can do to start supporting them is simplify tasks. We simplify our classrooms by adding visuals, by breaking lessons down, by breaking expectations down into simple step directions. All right. Okay, so I was starting to get into this, but how does executive functioning become impacted by trauma? Well, if trauma is the Bermuda Triangle, it's the place where executive functioning falls out. Our brain is focused on survival, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. How do we get through that situation? And just like the more we practice those executive functioning skills, the stronger those connections become. The more often that we have to practice those survival skills, the stronger those connections become in our brain, like we showed in the brain scans during our first session. So there are just some basic things, though, that when we were putting together this material, I hadn't thought about before that were kind of ahas that I do want to share with you around how trauma just takes kids out of the learning environment. If there's a lot of trauma happening to a child, they might just not be at school or they're frequently changing schools. And again, if we are trying to scaffold knowledge and skills, kids are being taken away from an environment in which they're able to practice these skills. Children who experience a lot of trauma, oftentimes in order to support all of the negative feelings that are associated with trauma and the anxiety and even like the somatic symptoms like headache and stomach ache and just overall feeling of ick that comes with feeling hopeless, they engage in distraction activities or disassociation. And disassociation is a totally normal cognitive function. So right now, some of you might be disassociating, and the fact that you are physically present, you are watching the screen, but you are not listening to what I'm saying. I really hope that that's not true, but it might be. And if that is, that's okay. Disassociation is actually a way that our brain, when it's overwhelmed with information, gives us a pause. This happens to me a lot. gosh, I hate admitting this, but I'm just going to be very vulnerable right now. This happens to me a lot when I'm driving home from work. So what will happen is work is really stressful. There's lots of different relationships to navigate and communication and things happening and interactions. And by the end of the day, and you'll have this too, and we'll talk about how to support you in this, but you're kind of done, and that's okay. But I'll get in my car and I will go from point A to school to point B at home. And the next time I am like consciously aware of my circumstances is when I am stepping out of my car at home. Now, I am a very safe driver, but I'm not always consciously engaged in the activity of driving because I know how to. I've done it a long time. In Kansas, you start learning at like 14. That's a whole nother discussion we can have once we meet in person. And because I am not having to hyper focus on engaging in these skills, my brain takes a vacation. Now, that is okay, probably not great when I'm driving home, but it's okay because I already have some skills I can draw upon. I know where I'm going. I know how to operate a car. Traffic's not super busy at that time. I'm driving against traffic, right? So there's lots of things that are favorably there to support me when I'm disassociating. However, if you are a child and you are in a classroom and we are trying to teach you things and your brain's off in la la land, there's nothing there to support you in staying in la la land because you don't have those skills yet. Oftentimes this information is stuff that maybe you've never been exposed to. We're trying to build on working memory, right? You're not accessing working memory in a conscious way. Now, there, again, you can do some basics, but it's really like rote memory, that really surface unintentional working memory at play when we're disassociating. So it's really problematic when people are doing it. And it's oftentimes found when people are under constant stress or threat, as many of our kids who have trauma histories have been, that disassociation is this way for your body to kind of be safe because you're not really consciously aware of the scary things that are happening. The side though, or the opposite side of that though, is then that they're not consciously aware of other things that they need to be, like the learning part. Family-related trauma is more damaging to executive functioning. I thought this was really interesting because when we think about families and how our family of origin is oftentimes where we practice these initial skills. So this is where we get the foundation for that flexibility, that self-regulation, that working memory, those three things we need to do school. But if there's lots of trauma and chaos happening in the home, there's not a high priority on teaching those skills. And honestly, if our caregiver is engaged in trauma, either as a perpetuator or a victim of, they might not get an opportunity to practice or have those skills themselves. So they're not being modeled for us. We're not being taught explicitly those skills. So trauma also places a priority on threat and negative emotional stimuli. So again, when you are seeking to survive, you're constantly scanning or hypervigilant about what is around you in order to avoid it. And again, if that's your focus, if you're trying to fight, flight, freeze, it's impossible to actively engage in working memory, flexibility, and in self-regulation because you're just ready to like go at a moment's notice. Appears to enhance shift towards threat stimuli. Again, we talked about that a little bit. The more your brain practices the fight, flight, freeze response, the more it's going to naturally go towards that, as opposed to the more you practice executive functioning skills, the more that you tend to go towards executive functioning skills. And then reciprocal impact creates a cycle. Okay, so I kind of think of this as like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if you are constantly on edge and trying to survive, then you will continue to be placed in situations where you're constantly on edge and trying to survive. It ends up being that people feel really trapped, almost like a hamster wheel. There's no way off. So again, this is a really great place where we as schools get to intervene, because in our relationships with kids, and it takes a long time, but we can show them there's a different way of doing things that might help them feel a little bit better. So again, we showed you this in the last presentation, but to talk about how I was just mentioning that brains are developed bottom up. So on the left-hand side, you see a brain that is neurotypically developed from the bottom up. The places that they're highlighting under those circles are the parts of the brain, the temporal lobes, that are associated with those executive functioning skills, which is great. Perfectly developed, you see all of it lighting up, good to go. Now on the other side, the right-hand side, it highlights a brain scan of a person who's experienced abuse. And what you'll notice is those temporal lobes, those parts associated with learning, are either underdeveloped or haven't yet been developed because of the trauma that the person has experienced. Because so much of the focus of their brain development has been on the bottom part, that amygdala response, fight, flight, freeze. So, the negative part is you might have a lot of students coming to you with brain scans that look more similar to the right-hand side. The positive part about this is, because there's always a positive, is that the more we work with kids, the more that we are able to give them safe, supportive, affirming environments and authentic relationships, the more they're able to practice those executive functioning skills and shift more towards that left side brain scan. Okay, this is just some more information and data for you. The only one I really want to highlight here is that physical abuse does involve, oftentimes, not always, but blows to the head. And when we think about brain damage on top of just the typical developmental damage that's impaired due to trauma, we might be dealing with brains that have a lot of needs. So just be consciously aware of that. Associated with the material, I think. When we think about delayed gratification, you may have seen different sorts of experiments or activities that put food in front of a child and test their inhibition skills by if they are able to wait to get that piece of candy now or wait an hour for a better piece of candy. Now, those are terrible tests of inhibition, because if you are a child who is hungry or from food instability, you are going to eat what's in front of you at that moment. Who cares what comes next? And that goes towards that foreshortened sense of future that's associated with trauma, right? So if you're food unstable, it doesn't matter if you promise me 3 marshmallows when we're done with this lesson. If I have 1 in front of me, I'm going to eat this now because I don't trust you, grown up, to give me 3 marshmallows later. Okay, so I just want to talk about that with delayed gratification. Delayed gratification related to inhibition is not about survival. When they originally did a lot of this research, the things they were trying to measure in inhibition were survival related, like food. This would be more like, I will give you a 5-minute break after you finish problems 1 through 3. Maybe they can't do that. That's okay to start. So we're going to meet kids where they're at, and we're going to build the skill by doing things like, if you can't wait 5 minutes or to your break because that's how long these problems will take, let's do 1, let's do 2. And then slowly, intentionally, we increase our expectations on kids so that they are able to accomplish this successfully. It's about us as educators creating the conditions to support mastery. It's not about the kids coming to us with that mastery. Again, us as educators and the adults creating the conditions for mastery, not them coming to us already with the ability to master. That's where they learn. Okay, shift is all about flexible thinking. It's about generalizing. So I can do social skill with my favorite teacher. I can also do said social skill with rando person in the hall, which oftentimes as a school social worker, I am rando person in the hall, unless you're on my caseload. So it comes back to, are you able to generalize those skills? Reaction and processing speed is an executive functioning skill, and it's not. So it's associated with them in that for some people, they can learn to process things quickly and respond quicker. depending upon your cognitive ability. Some of our students, it is not a fair expectation because of their disability to assume that they can do that. So it may or may not be applicable to shift depending upon the learner in front of you. Dealing with new demands and challenging plans, gosh, that's really what learning is, right? That shift. And then when kids are unable to shift, again, like they said in the video, she showed the little boy in the corner who had his arms crossed while the student was throwing a ball, trying to get him to play. It appears sometimes that those kids are rigid. Now, there is rigidity associated with different disability categories that may or may not have anything to do with trauma, that may or may not impact executive functioning. So with all of this, the disclaimer is this is a good rule of thumb. This is not the hard and fast facts of all of our kids. So I know we have said that probably in session 1. If we have not yet, I'm saying it now. Okay, emotional focus and control. So it is our ability to effectively deal with others, right? Modulate our emotional responses. When kids don't have this ability, like again, the little girl in the video, she was whacking her peer with that thing on her head. Maybe it was her sibling. If it was her sibling, that was a little more normal as far as behavior, but we'll assume it was a peer then. So she was whacking her peer on the head with a doll. So those deficits appear as that emotional ability, avoidance, numbing, distracting, poor follow through. Why even bother getting started? I'm not going to finish. I'd rather do all these other things. Initiation. This is that ability to start tasks. And when you struggle with this, it might look like procrastination. As kids get older, we assume that they're lazy or that they get stuck. It also can look like a lack of motivation, but really it's just, I don't know how to get started. No one's ever shown me, first then. So again, when we start talking about intervention strategies, first then is a really great intervention strategy for a person who struggles with initiation. All they have to do is take that first step. Working memory, we've talked a lot about. Planning and organization of ideas. Again, it looks very similar to persons that struggle with initiation. However, they might be able to get started. So maybe I can start on a task, but I'm not going to follow through. Again, when persons are extremely stressed out, are focused on survival, there's really no point in finishing, or I don't have the capacity to finish because I'm too focused on all these other things that I need in order to get by. Again, that goes into organization of materials, self-monitoring. So self-monitoring is tricky. This is a skill we usually see that happens in like late elementary school, early adolescence, middle school, even the freshman year of high school. But it's our ability to manage our own performance and measure it accurately against a standard, right? So in standards-based education, we have tons of standards. And when we're little kids, when we provide feedback as teachers, we're providing it to families so that they can support a child's ability to understand, okay, here's where I need to get in order to have that mastery. As kids get older in high school, we start having those conversations with them. If you're at Cora Secondary School, you will oftentimes be sitting down in situations where you are showing a student their data and they're looking at it with you and you're problem solving and goal setting. We can start goal setting though with kids from a very early age and support them in their ability to monitor those goals. When people aren't able to do that, it looks like they have poor insight. They're maybe blaming others, right? Like, well, I can't do this because of da 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 da. They might not understand why other people get frustrated with them. Teachers really get frustrated with kids that aren't self-motivated. So be thoughtful about that. They don't understand why. Like, that's just the norm for them and maybe the people around them. So again, this is a place where you are going to pause your presentation and pop in your Pear Deck if you have that slide open, and go ahead and just take a few moments to reflect on, in your own words, what is learning. And when you're ready, go ahead and come back and hit start. But we'll be reviewing and responding to your answers. Okay, So again, I've already talked a little bit about this, but just a little bit more in depth. Learning itself is scaffolded. So we build houses in our brains, right? When we're teaching how to read or how to math. We start with the foundation, just like this little child on the side is doing. They have a really good foundation for their card house and they're adding to it. So scaffolded and cumulative, in that we are consistently adding to. Learning also happens in places that are active. Depending upon what type of learner a person is, they might actually need to be up and moving while they're learning. And that is certainly an accommodation in all of our classrooms that we need to be open to making, even if that's just the ability for a student to pace back and forth. Learning occurs in complex social environments, also known as school. It has to be an authentic context. We need to figure out what our students need to know and what they want to know, and we need to make it applicable to life after school. Why does this matter to me? I so often hear kids say that, like, well, why do I need to know this? That is not a challenge to you. It's a challenge to the content. Help them connect it. You know why they know it, need to know it. And if it doesn't make sense to you or them, maybe we should be questioning it as a system. It doesn't mean that that kid's bad. Learning does require motivation, and it also requires cognitive engagement, which again, if they're struggling with executive functioning, these are going to be some challenges. Okay, so there is an activity here that is optional, but if you are interested in learning about your own learning style, you can pause here and click the link in the browser, and it will take you to a self-assessment for your learning style. This is really important for our classroom staff because oftentimes your learning style will not connect with your learner's learning style. So you need to adjust. You need to know how you learn and how they learn in order to be a better teacher. Learning often imitates play, especially for our elementary and early secondary school kids. The more we are able to make it imitate play, the more active it also is and the more fun it is. And then kids have like this positive association with learning and they always want to do it. So be thinking about that. Language is not always required. That's super important for some of our learners, given that their disabilities impair their ability to access language, right? So how can we offer learning in ways that don't always require language? And then it's all about connecting new information. So if you choose to, go ahead and pause here, take the self-assessment for learning styles, and start back up whenever you're ready. Okay. So again, this is a review of what was in the videos, but a little bit more in depth. When we have executive functioning concerns, it impairs our ability to learn. We need those skills to do school. And I'll let you read this over. When we're thinking about those skills that are associated with executive functioning, we need them to do long-term projects, planning an organization. Our working memory builds on prior concepts. It helps us reflect knowledge, especially on assessments. When we think about a summative assessment in school, we're thinking about kids being able to access all of their prior knowledge from that unit or that semester if you're in a Reg Ed program. We're thinking about planning, inhibition, regulation, and self-monitoring. I love that this says group projects. Historically, our learners hate group projects. Why? And if you're all yelling at the screen, well, because they struggle with executive functioning, ding, ding, ding. It's not because they dislike other kids or they don't know how to get along. It's because it's too much to try to plan and inhibit and regulate and self-monitor with all these other people. So in order to support them, we have to generalize these skills. I would not recommend for students that you don't know throwing them into a group project. I would start off maybe in a dyad and then slowly increase their tolerance and scalability and mastery in working with others. When we think about self-monitoring, that also supports our ability to self-advocate, which is huge, huge for our kids for after high school. Our students have identified disabilities. They have to be able to articulate that and what their needs are as they enter the next steps in their life after high school, be it secondary education or post-secondary, or be it the workforce. They need to know how to say, oh, I think I need this right now. Can I please have this, to their employers or educators after us? Inhibition, organization, working memory are needed to distinguish sets of information. It's pretty across the board there. And then shift is another part of our brain. It's not all about emotional shift. It's also about our shift in accessing materials. And when we think about just the actual physical shifts that happen in a school day, be it if a teacher on a cart comes in for an elective, or they're shifting from recess to classroom or subject to subject, there's lots of shifts that traditionally happen that are associated with this part of the brain, in addition to the shifts that have to happen per each subject. So when we are teaching, we are calling upon words and sounds. There's different parts of stories. This is in reading, but anything can be part of storytelling. So there are shifts within shifts within shifts happening in a school day. We've already talked about this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. The one thing I do want us to think about, though, is that just like kids bring to us their really hard things, those really positive things that we support them in learning, they can bring home with them. So when we teach executive functioning skills explicitly and we practice them and they get better at having those neural connections wired in a way that it's more automatic, they're able to bring those effects home with them. So they are able maybe to support the family situation if maybe some of those younger kids are around them and teaching them some positive things. And it also can buffer against some of the trauma and toxic stress happening in their home, because again, they're able to look at it more logically and problem solve versus just going into that survival response. Okay, so what can we do? I've been talking about what are those interventions. Also, again, this is so hard because we're not together, but I'm a giant nerd. So I say that very proudly. My students will all tell you this. So I hope that you do enjoy our fantastic Marvel Avengers slide here. Okay, so we can have meaningful social interactions. Having genuine, authentic, safe, supportive, collaborative relationships is the #1 thing. If you remember nothing from today, take that away with you, because that is the best intervention to support our learners with trauma histories. If you're thinking, I can remember more than one thing, awesome. All these other things are great too. Make school fun. Have enjoyable activities. Enjoyable activities create those authentic relationships because there's some shared experience there, right? You had a fun time. You have some history now. Gradually increase demands on kids. Again, I've talked about this probably ad nauseum, but meet kids where they are at, not where you expect them to be, and slowly increase demands as they develop a sense of mastery. They don't come to us with that. We need to help instill that in them. Progressive skill building for our students that are with us for a longer amount of time. When they start experiencing a lot of academic success, we can support them with some personal goals too and teach them some self-monitoring skills, because when they're done with high school, we want them to be able to do all of this. We can be active learners. Again, go back to that learning style self-assessment. If you did not do it, maybe you want to. And think about how your learning style may or may not be compatible with your students and how you can adjust to meet them where they need us to be. most of our students are active learners. That might be their primary. They have other secondaries that we can try to pull in. This really is an invitation for us to be creative and come up with learning experiences that are meaningful because they're active. Take breaks. We're trying to model that in this presentation by offering different types of activities and different suggestions to take a 5-minute break now. But I think it's, oh gosh, I'm gonna mess this up. Okay, so there's a certain amount of time that our brains can hold capacity for learning. I think it's like every 20 minutes. And if not, we're just gonna say it is, because it can't be much longer than that. But every 20 minutes that you are learning something or actively engaged in something, you need to take a break. When you walk away from it and come back, it gives your brain the opportunity to reset that attention clock so that you're more engaged and connected to the material. Which is why I hope you're taking some pauses and walking away from your screen as we're able to do this really interesting, creative onboarding online. Also, you can be reflective and plan. You can teach these skills, but you can't teach these skills if you don't use these skills. So use them as a person, use them in your classroom instruction, and then teach kids how to be reflective and plan. We're gonna recognize and reward success. We're gonna catch kids being good. We're also gonna recognize and reward resilience, even if the full outcome's not achieved. So you'll notice on the bottom right-hand corner, it says copyright Pete Singer. So as we said earlier, Pete Singer is one of our third-party consultants, and he did develop these materials. So he has a story about Mrs. Anderson. Just briefly though, it's the story of a teacher who recognized a kid for being able to do most of what she wanted him to do as far as his ability to manage his emotions. So this child was having an argument with another child, and when he first came to her classroom, arguments would immediately escalate into a fight response, and he would be throwing toys at other children and yelling and screaming and name-calling. So it happened where his system was overstimulated and he started to regress towards this fight response. But this day, he didn't throw anything. There was the yelling and the name calling, but the objects weren't tossed. And the first thing this teacher said to this child was, "Oh my God, I am so proud of you for not throwing anything." And that moment, that child recognized that they had had some success and mastery. So the things that we had been working on prior to crisis, right? Because we always want to teach new skills when we're not in that fight, flight, freeze. One of those things kicked in, and all of a sudden that fight response went down a few notches. It wasn't perfect, none of us are. The full outcome was not achieved, but in recognizing that in the moment, it built up that child's esteem and increased the connection to that teacher. And also that teacher was able to call home and say, "Oh my gosh, you will never believe it. This is what happened today," and share that success with the family. And the more positive phone calls that we can get home, the more we're able to make those deposits into the relationship bank, the more we're also able to withdraw. So when hard things happen, we can get through it together, and our students don't feel like we're abandoning them or that they aren't worthy. So yeah, recognize and reward resilience, even if it's not a fully achieved outcome. Help students identify their support systems. Again, this is an invitation to be really reflective to the values and culture you bring to the learning environment. Oftentimes there are assumed support systems that come from our own places of power and privilege. So get to know your kids and get to know who they connect with. It's different maybe than who you connect with. Maybe it's similar, but help them identify their supports in a way that doesn't shame them for their support system, maybe not looking like what the assumed cultural paradigm is. You're gonna model skills for them all the time. You're constantly modeling when you're at work. We as an educational system at 916 provide trauma treatment via our Canvas Health school-based mental health supports, and our school social workers, school psychologists, and mental health specialists are all skilled in trauma aware care and providing that. All of our teachers are too. Our education assistants, our related services, that's why we're doing this, right? So check mark on that one. We're also going to connect with our families. So often families get left out of the picture when students are in a setting 4. They just feel completely disconnected. So we're going to build our capacity to collaborate with families and have them come along with us in recognizing and rewarding success and celebrating positive outcomes, which I truly believe you all have. And I'm excited to get to meet you in person and hear about the cool things you're getting to do with kids. And then we're also going to, as a system, address primary and secondary traumatic stress in staff. Just like kids are unable to access their skills and abilities when they are in that fight, flight, freeze, so are staff. And if you think about all of the anxiety we have right now and trauma with the global pandemic, the racial violence that's happening in our country, that we're all very aware of right now, that is impairing our ability to access our skills and competencies. And it is our role as a district to ensure that we have supports in place to address those primary and secondary traumas in staff, including the things that happen in the classroom. We'll get into some examples later, but your jobs are hard. You see hard things. You hear hard things. That impacts you. We want to normalize that and we want to support you. Okay, so these are some other examples of active things that you can do to teach kids in these specific functioning areas. Also, I put in one more link to, or not a link in here, I'm sorry, one more shout out to the Harvard Center for Developing Child. If you want to go and watch another video or read their brief on things that we can do to enhance executive functioning skills, the title of that article is there for you. It does bring you to some additional videos, but we've already viewed the 2 that are my favorite. So why bother with the rest? I'm so sorry. I know the best feedback I'm going to get is, man, that Cara was not as funny as she thought. I'm trying to make this entertaining via technology. Okay, so what can you do? Inhibition. If you are trying to teach a kid who has a deficit in inhibition, Fruit Ninja is a really cool game. And this is a fun one because you can trick them into thinking that they're getting like free time for no reason. There is never free time for no reason in school, okay? Fruit Ninja is a game that teaches them, though, to stop. So you're this ninja, and you've got this cool sword thingy, and you're chopping different fruits. And it'll tell you, like, what fruit you need to be focusing on. And you're not supposed to chop the other fruit because, like, if you're supposed to be focusing on strawberries and you hit a banana, you lose points. And it's a really fun way to teach kids to, like, slow down and be really thoughtful about focusing on one thing at a time. Another good thing to do is counting only one of several items. You can also play Simon Says. That's a really big fun one. And you know, as I say some of these, you might be like, well, I work at the secondary school. Okay, I've worked at the secondary level a long time. My students and scholars are just as into this, if not embarrassingly more so sometimes, than our elementary kids. So feel empowered to try things, okay? Don't feel like, oh, well, that's not age appropriate. Yes, it is. They're kids. Like, and I don't mean that in like a negative, oh, they're children, I'm above them way. I mean it like developmentally, they're children. And so often our kids are looking for an invitation to get to be kids. So invite them, make it fun, make it silly. You're gonna have to own some of your own insecurity and vulnerability, but play Simon Says. You can do some slow racing. Can play bingo. Oh my God, bingo is huge. And again, it teaches inhibition because you can't go through your card and like circle everything, even though they might want to, and they might at the first, round of bingo circle everything. The idea is you get better at games as you play them. You get better at skills as you practice them. If you're working with a student who has deficits in shift, you're going to really focus on first, then. Right? So this is the first thing I'm going to do. You're not going to have them walk into a classroom and spew a million directions at them at once. You're also going to do well by all kids to have visuals posted throughout your classrooms, including visual schedules, visual breakdowns of lessons. Put it on your boards, put it in the hallways in your learning communities, put it on their desks if you have like a bell-to-bell schedule of what you do. So we start with warm-up. Number 2, I'm going to write a reflection. Okay, number 3, I'm going to do reading. Now, the reading pages might be up on the board, but you get the flow. That really supports shift, because then all of a sudden staff can be like, oh, okay, well, you did number 1 and 2. So it looks like, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to do 3 next. Okay, thank you. Kids want to be successful. They want to do well. We just have to give them the tools to do it until they learn them on their own, which, well, until they learn them with us, because we don't learn on our own, which is the whole point of this. Okay, other collaborative games can be really good in Shift. Forbidden Island and Stay Tuned are a couple. Labyrinth is another one. This is a really great activity that a lot of our students love too for Shift, arguing the opposite side. Mostly because I think a lot of our students feel very skilled at defending a position, and this encourages them to think about an opposing view, but also shift their focus on to learning something new. So this could be a really cool activity I would encourage you to consider. If you have a student struggling with emotional focus and control, again, best practice all around. When you start a class and when you end a lesson, before you have them shift to something else, do some sort of mindful grounding activity every time. It's just a really good best practice that supports all learners. And if your learner is particularly struggling with emotion focus control, it certainly supports them specific to what their need is. Temperature/mood rings. If you are not as old as I am, that's okay. But there's this thing that's going to age me called a mood ring. You might not be familiar with them if you're younger, but the color on the ring changes based on your mood, right? But it's actually based on your body temperature. And you can teach them about the different body temperatures and how your temperature goes up when you're feeling really excited or when you're really nervous. And that's a way to teach kids how to self-monitor. So possibly think about some mood rings and pull back some awesome 80s, 90s-ness. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a slow countdown that when we're trying to support someone in emotionally regulating, we might give them a 5 count to think through their choices. We also can use counting down for fun, rewarding things too, but counting down can be a really positive tool when we're trying to support emotional and focus control. Sensory grounding, so using all 5 senses when you're doing an activity can be really great. And the more you can incorporate all of these into your regular daily classroom practice, again, the better for all learners, right? Mindfulness exercises we already talked about. Headphone lectures. Okay, so for some kids, this is an accommodation for their disability, and they should have this. For some students, headphone lectures can be a good way to have them ignore the external stimulus that's occurring around them that maybe isn't directly related to their disability category, but is still a need. So if you can give them some headphones and either have them tune out the extra stimuli, or have headphones that are connected to audio so that they can really focus in on the lecture that way, that can be really supportive to learning. Initiation. Help the kid with the first step. Don't just like give them the first step and then come back like 10 minutes later and like, well, you haven't started. Yeah, they know. A much better alternative is to do something with them to get them started. And the more you practice it, the more likely they are just to jump in at some point and they'll have already been started. You know, maybe by December, you'll be like, whoa, you already started this, and you can have a cool celebration. Other things that support initiation as far as games, puzzles are huge. Minecraft is also huge, which I feel weird about saying, because if you've been in education a while, it was the bane of every educator's existence a few years ago, but it's back in vogue and teaching initiation or maybe it never left being cool. I don't know. Storytelling is also a really great skill. Again, you can do this in a classroom, but it teaches a person, oh, how did it start? So they have to really think through a process of starting. And if you're doing some sort of classroom activity where they're passing around the story, that's also a cool activity that goes into initiation. Okay, working memory, deep breathing. So again, that mindfulness, slowing your body down, supports us in being able to access our working memory. Memory games are really great, and there's a ton of really fun ones online. I think about things like Stay Tuned. Scavenger hunts by memory can be really cool too. If you're thinking about planning and organization of ideas, again, Minecraft. I know, I'm sorry. You can also do games like Risk and Jenga, Codename. Anything that's strategy-based is going to be really good for planning and organization. Sorting is also great. And man, we have some students who really, it supports their calm when they're sorting. So this is where it's really important for you to get to know your kids and get to know what their interests are and what they like, but also try some things, right? They might not know that they really like sorting games or sorting the books in your classroom. It's calming for them. Oh gosh, but it's also supporting their planning and organization of ideas. Organization of materials. So there's lots of building projects that you can do online. We also have some really great opportunities at our sites via art classes, math, or woodshop, where you're actually really able to build things. But again, it teaches persons that first through whatever number step that they need to do in order to follow directions and make something. We already talked about sorting or storing activities. So take home. Okay, so this is a big thing our students struggle with. We give them a folder, right? And this isn't just our students, this is lots of students. You give them a folder and there's stuff in there and they have to have it signed and returned and brought back, and they lose it, the dog eats it. I don't know, millions of things happen to these folders. I've heard so many stories over the years, some of them true, some of them very creative and loosely based on truth. But when we are able to give kids opportunities to take things home and then make sure that they have a high value, we're more likely to get them returned. And when I mean high value, I mean have your parents sign this sheet saying how awesome you are. I really want to make sure that they get this home. The more they practice that sort of thing, the more likely they're just able then to do it. Again, when it's something like bring home this, oh gosh, what's the one? Oh, the field trip forms. That's when they lose a lot. So bring home this field trip form, have them sign it. You think that would be like a high reward? And it is, but it's too futuristic for a lot of our kids. They don't understand the immediacy that we have because we have to get our paperwork in order to take them on cool field trip. It's like an hour before the cool field trip because all of a sudden it's very real in their brains. They're like, I don't have my field trip form, and you feel awful and they're melting down. So practice these skills before they need them with things like, I drew this picture of how awesome I think you are, have your parents sign it. Okay, maybe not that, but something that's not that big of a deal to you, but will be to them because it's centered in their relationship and building their own self-esteem. And have them practice returning it. Self-monitoring, again, I talked about this a little bit in how we do it at the secondary school where we're actually pulling out data and we're showing kids how to write SMART goals for themselves. There's also opportunities just for a person to self-rate, and you can talk about those. And they have type in elementary self-rating tools, and there's all these things that kids can do, and then you can do it alongside them and compare and contrast your responses. It could even be simply on a scale of 1 to 5, how well were you able to keep your hands to yourself this class period? 1 being not at all, 5 being superstar awesome. You rate them, they rate them, you have a discussion. It's not about shaming them. It's like, oh, well, you rated yourself a 5. Wow, you thought you were awesome. I saw you maybe be at a 3. Can we talk about it? Because I really want to understand how you got to a 5. You have the conversation. They're like, oh, yeah, I guess I did, jump out of my seat a few times and I did run that one lap around the classroom. Okay, so that puts me more at a 3. So if I want to be a 5, then these are the things I need to do, and having that explicit instruction with them. Time-based activities can be really helpful for self-monitoring. They require you to slow down. Blowing bubbles is one that can be really fun. And depending upon the school site you're at, you might be able to include bubble gum. Check with your administrator. Don't want any angry emails. Kara said use bubble gum. But you can use bubble gum to blow bubbles, or bubbles outside. It's another one where you're really having to focus on blowing the bubble.